Welcome to Grandad's Story Time. Please like and subscribe. I post new content every day. Bob the Builder. Dizzy and Muck work it out. Bob and Wendy had just finished plastering Mrs. Broadbent's wall. "The plaster's drying nicely," Bob said. "We should be able to paint it this afternoon." "Oh, good," said Wendy. "I need to run over to Mrs. Potts' house. She asked me to lay a new path in her garden." Wendy hurried back to the building yard to get the team. Muck, Rolly and Dizzy were loaded up and ready to go. "Can we pave it?" Wendy asked. "Yes, we can," the team shouted excitedly. When they got there, Wendy asked Mrs. Potts where she would like the new path in her garden to go. Mrs. Potts wasn't sure. "I want it to go near my statues." "Which are your favourites?" asked Wendy. "Oh, the Greek god and Cheeky Charlie," Miss Potts told Wendy proudly. "Then the new path should definitely go near those two," replied Wendy. "Wonderful!" Mrs. Potts cried. "Just be extra careful of Cheeky Charlie and make sure you don't flatten my flower beds." "Don't worry, we'll take care of everything," Wendy reassured her. Mrs. Potts seemed unsure, but she still had to go to the store to pick up some groceries, so she left. The team went to work. Just then Wendy's cell phone rang. "Hi Bob, the plaster dried?" "OK, I'll get Rolly to give me a lift. See you soon." Wendy went back outside and instructed Muck and Dizzy to lay the paving stones on the path while she was gone. "You going to leave Muck and Dizzy on their own?" Rolly asked as they drove back to Mrs. Broadbent's house. "Just for a little while," replied Wendy. "Oh-ho," Rolly said quietly. He knew what trouble Muck and Dizzy could get into together. "Is everything all right in Mrs. Potts' garden?" Bob asked Wendy. "Yes," replied Wendy. "I left Muck and Dizzy in charge of laying the paving stones." Bob was surprised. "Do you think it's a good idea to leave those two alone? You know how they get into trouble sometimes." "They'll be fine," Wendy reassured him. But Muck and Dizzy weren't fine. "OK, let's go, Muck," Dizzy said in a bossy voice. "Hey, Wendy said for us to do this together," Muck replied, rumbling towards Dizzy. "Watch out for Cheeky Charlie," Dizzy shouted. Muck swerved to avoid hitting Cheeky Charlie, and the paving stones flew into the air and broke into pieces on the ground. "Oh no!" Muck cried. "The paving stones!" "And look at Cheeky Charlie," added Dizzy. The statue's nose was chipped. Back at Mrs. Broadbent's house, Bob was still worried about Muck and Dizzy. "Maybe I'd better check to see how things are going at Mrs. Potts' garden," Wendy suggested. "Good idea," Bob said, relieved. "Oh no!" Wendy cried when she arrived. "Now what are we going to do?" "I have an idea," said Dizzy. "We can use the broken stones to make a path." "Crazy paving?" Wendy exclaimed. "You mean crazy Dizzy," Muck laughed. "No, crazy paving is when you make a path out of broken paving stones," Wendy explained. "Hee hee, it's Dizzy's crazy paving," Muck said. "Yippee!" cheered Dizzy. "Let's get to work." Working together, Muck and Dizzy got the job done. "Hey, it looks great," Muck exclaimed. "You're really clever, Dizzy." "Thanks, Muck," replied Dizzy, "but I couldn't have done it without you." When Bob finished painting Mrs. Broadbent's wall, he decided to see how Miss Potts' garden path was coming along. "Hi, Bob," said Mrs. Potts, who was just coming home from the store. "What perfect timing. Let's go see my new garden path together." Bob and Mrs. Potts couldn't believe their eyes. "You've made crazy paving," Bob explained. "Good job, everyone." Mrs. Potts clapped her hands with excitement. "It's so pretty." "Whose idea was to use those little pieces of stone?" Mrs. Potts asked. "It was our idea," Muck and Dizzy said together. Then they looked at Wendy. "Actually, we had an accident and we broke the paving stones," Muck confessed. "We're sorry." "That's okay," said Mrs. Potts. Then she looked at her new path and smiled warmly. "I think your accident made a beautiful surprise, and I always thought Cheeky Charlie's nose was too big anyway." "That's our team," said Wendy with a smile. "We're always coming up with smashing ideas." The end. Thank you for watching. If you like this content, please give me a big thumbs up. Please subscribe, it's free, to support us and allow us to create more great content.